please. Well, good evening and thank you everybody for joining us. This is the, I believe it's the fourth public session. The City of Charleston Citizens Police Advisory Council has held for the public. And this is just an ongoing series of different public information events, typically, led by CPAC with, the Charleston Police Department being the subject matter experts on a variety of topics. Tonight, we're going to address motor vehicle stops, and we have a pretty good plan for you. So what I first want to do is I want to do some introductions, if you don't mind. Let's start with Councilman Harris.
Good evening, Jerry Harris, Vice Chair of the CPAC, appointed in May of 2020 by Mayor Tecklenburg.
Thank you. Councilmember Grant.
I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can.
Good evening, I'm Doris Grant. Newly appointed policy chairperson.
Thank you. Councilmember Broom.
Hi, I'm Emily Broom. I represent District 11, which is City Councilman Ross Appel's district.
Thank you. Jill.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jill Idson. I'm the Procedural Justice and Research Director at the Charleston Police Department.
Thank you. Captain Bruder.
Hey, I'm Jason Broder. I'm a captain with the Charleston Police Department. I'm now over the Patrol Division. Most of 2021 and 22, I spent over the Special Operations Division.
Thank you. And I'm Paul Tamburino, and I'm the current CPAC chairperson. I was appointed by Carl Brady out of District 5. And again, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn over to our moderator, Emily Broom. It's all yours, Emily.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who is joining us tonight. I want to welcome you all to the continuation of our series of presentations that we have organized through CPAC, which stands for the Citizens Police Advisory Council. We do this in partnership with the Charleston Police Department. We aim to do one of these quarterly, each one being a different topic. Tonight's topic is Charleston Police motor vehicle stops, what you should know. And the reason that we chose motor vehicle stops for tonight's topic is after the racial bias audit was chartered in 2018, one of the recommendations was to form the CPAC. And so the CPAC has three main focus areas: communications, the review of general orders and policies, as they, and also the one that we're going to hear about tonight, motor vehicle stops. And so since this is one of our three main areas of focus, we saw it was an important topic for us to discuss as one of our quarterly informational sessions. CPAC has been keenly involved in the discussion of policies as they relate to motor vehicle stops. And we're encouraged to give feedback and recommendations as citizens representing the city of Charleston and each district in the city. Tonight, we're going to talk about some of the things that Charleston Police Department does differently than other agencies around the country. And as it relates to motor vehicle stops, a lot of us on CPAC participate in the Citizens Police Academy that is put on by the CPD. We encourage all residents of the city of Charleston to enroll in the Citizens Police Academy to get a firsthand experience of how the CPD handles motor vehicle stops firsthand. Before we get started, I want to introduce the Chief of Police for the Charleston Police Department, Chief Luther Reynolds, who will be giving a few remarks before we get started. Turning it over to you, Chief.
Thanks so much, Emily, and thank you to our CPAC chairperson and just all the people that are on the call right now that have put together not only this presentation, but just identifying these topics and challenging us to be more transparent and to discuss more about what we do, how we do it, why we do it. So I'm excited to hear from Captain Bruder. He's going to do the majority of the presentation. And I just want to talk a little bit about traffic. It's a very important thing. If you go to any jurisdiction in the country, any of our teams in the city, anywhere in the low country, the number one complaint is traffic. And there's a whole lot of things that we deal with fatalities, with personal injury collisions, with property damage, with quality of life complaints. And there's so much that we need to do, but we need to do it with our communities. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about why we do traffic stops, how we do them, what that entails. And I'll tell you, for me, Jason and others have heard me say this, probably get tired of hearing me say it, but I talk about the 3 E's a lot when it comes to traffic: engineering, education, and enforcement. And by no means can we solve these really substantial complex issues with just enforcement. Enforcement becomes part of our effort, but there's so much more that we can do with education and with engineering in a lot of different areas in the city. So when we look at these things, we look at them from a problem solving perspective, and ultimately our goal is to save lives. And so we're very intentional about our objectives. We've through the audit, we have better data. We're not where we want to be, but a lot better data and a lot more positive results. And one thing that I get asked a lot about is, hey, Chief, do you guys have quotas? The answer is no. And in fact, I'll say very emphatically what I've said to our command, to our troops, to our communities. If an officer writes 1,000 tickets and doesn't have any impact on those things I just mentioned, saving lives, mitigating these collisions, helping with quality of life issues in a community, then we've failed. Some officers might write 1 ticket or no tickets, but do more with education and visibility and other things, and really have an impact and do accomplish our mission without writing any tickets. So I can tell you, we're not connected to revenues. We're not connected to quotas, and we do what we do if we're doing it right in the areas where we need to be doing it and doing it effectively. And so the race bias audit has helped us identify areas that we need to look at within our organization, things like race and equity and bias and all those things. And I'll tell you, the purpose of traffic stops, whether it's criminal things that are occurring, violence in our communities, whether it's traffic, whatever it is to do it right, to make sure that we're consistent with constitutional principles in our efforts to solve problems, to treat people with dignity and respect, and to increase safety, while, if we do it right, increasing our relationships, enhancing our relationships, and increasing public trust. And I was asked to just kind of touch on, because it's so timely, the Memphis event that occurred where Tyree Nichols was murdered. And I'm gonna read a statement that I think you all just, at least everybody on our council, our advisory council, just got a copy of this in the email. But it's an organization that I'm a part of, and I co-authored this as the executive director of this organizational. And we said the FBI National Executive Institute Associates, which is the organization that I'm the executive director of, and its membership categorically condemn as unacceptable and shameful the beating of Mr. Tyree Nichols by 5 members of the Memphis Police Department on 7th of January, 2023. We now know there's more people that are involved in that event. We view this conduct not as expression of law enforcement, but as a criminal act that resulted in the death of Mr. Nichols. We see no excuse, rationalization for this conduct. The behavior of these officers violates everything that is good and decent, which law enforcement in America stands for and must represent. Law enforcement leaders in every state, county, and municipality, and this went around nationwide from our organization, must lead their agencies with strong ethical principles applying to all their employees. Violation of these core principles should not be tolerated by agency leadership, ranking officers, line officers, or non-sworn personnel. Agency procedures and practices in recruitment, selection, training, promotion, supervision, discipline, and accountability must be guided by principles such as integrity and responsibility, respect for the rights and dignity of all individuals, and concern for the safety and the physical well-being of those they contact and those that they take into custody. Law enforcement agencies throughout the nation should look to strengthening the ethics of organizational cultures as a means of ensuring effective performance and increasing public trust. And it's signed by me and our president. And I just, I'll end and ask Jason to start. But people ask me what happened, and I'll tell you, in my entire career of nearly 35 years, I've never seen anything so horrific. And I know there's more investigation that needs to occur. I made a statement even before the video was released because I had heard enough about it, even without seeing the video, to condemn the actions of those officers and what happened and the results of their criminal actions. We've had discussions with our command. I did interviews with the media, again, even before the video was released. And since then, I've made a statement and done a video for our troops. And I'll just tell you, that was despicable what happened. And I'll tell you, any agency that is policing in this era needs to focus on doing things right and all the things that we're trying to do. And that's probably a good segue for Jason, and I'll be available for questions at the end as well. But Emily, thank you so much. And I appreciate the opportunity to open up.
Thank you so much, Chief, for getting us started tonight and for your remarks. I want to turn it over briefly back to Jill. You brought up some data points, and Jill is going to talk to us about the dashboard.
Yes, just briefly, everyone.
Jill, 1 second, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Everybody that's participating, if you've got questions, we're happy to answer the questions at the end of the session. If you would, on your Zoom session, you should have a button for Q&A. If you type your questions in there, at the end, Emily's going to go over those and address those to the appropriate panelists. So please put your questions in there and we'll get to those. Thank you.
Okay, just very briefly, because I know we want to get into the content of the presentation. The racial bias audit was brought up both by Chief Reynolds and Council Member Broom. And we just wanted to let you know that you actually, as a member of the public, can go on and see the progress that was made towards the racial bias audit. In 2019, an outside evaluator came in and reviewed the department, provided 72 total recommendations. One of the areas of focus was on traffic that we're now calling motor vehicle stops. And so we have a website at the very bottom of that slide that gives you the location to go and find that information online for yourself, and you can track and see what the department is doing. And so at this point, let me turn it over to our main presenter this evening, Captain Jason Bruder.
Appreciate it. So the much anticipated topic of motor vehicle stops. So as you just heard, motor vehicle stops were part of the audit. I'll refer to that throughout this presentation today. And the first thing I want to cover before I even get to the definition of motor vehicle stops is why am I now calling them motor vehicle stops instead of traffic stops? We've got a policy that's under review. I believe CPAC actually has it for the final review. But some of the things in there are going to talk about motor vehicle stops, and we'll hit on those as we go through the presentation. But one of the big things was that as we were having these discussions in the community and through the audit and over the last few years, we realized that there's a preconceived notion when you mention traffic. When you say traffic stop, people immediately think two things that we've learned. One, they think about speeding, they think about DUI, they think about traffic that they sit in every day, they think about the pains of that, they think about traffic collisions, and they think every stop, every motor vehicle stop has to do with that. The other thing we learned pretty quickly is that they immediately tie that to a traffic unit. So if a department like we do has a traffic unit, the assumption becomes, well, the traffic stops are done by the traffic unit. What are these other officers doing and what is their purpose when they stop a vehicle? So through our discussions, we've decided to shift to motor vehicle stops, hoping that's provides more clarity and better explanation, and at least opens the door to a little more education for us. We've now defined in policy a motor vehicle stop, and it requires one of two things to be a legal traffic stop. It either needs probable cause or the reasonable suspicion of another crime, and the officer should be able to articulate that before pulling the stop. And that's what the constitutional standard is, both for the United States Constitution, 4th Amendment, and the South Carolina Constitution. So our policy is going to indicate that, and it's going to define that as being a motor vehicle stop. So that's what a motor vehicle stop is. Now, why do we need to have those as a tool for law enforcement? As police, we're tasked with with so many different things out there. Most people wouldn't believe it. One of my first calls was to go fix somebody's cable. Yes, those are all the different things we need to do out there as police. But everybody immediately thinks of the things that I just mentioned about traffic, safety related, roadway safety type stuff, speeding, running red lights, running stop signs, changing lanes, all those types of things people immediately think of. But we also use motor vehicle stops for other things like responding to violent crime. There may be a suspect vehicle. We may have Ebola. We may have information that a certain description of a car is involved with a bank robbery in another jurisdiction. We may have information that there was a robbery series going on and we need to be aware of this. And we also get calls from citizens like, hey, I just saw somebody do this crime. We think you should go stop them. And we respond to that and go stop those. So all those things fall underneath motor vehicle stops. So it's not just a single tool that we can point to and say, okay, this tool is used to fix this particular problem. This is a tool that can fix numerous problems that our community has. One thing that in our policy that I want to be very clear about is that in our policy currently and in the new version, officers are not allowed to, they cannot stop people just based on race or ethnicity. Again, I went over the definition includes they must have reasonable suspicion of a crime about to or being committed, or probable cause, which would be breaking the law. So that's what our policy is. That defines what it is and how we're going to use it. And I'm going to get into a little bit about how we actually go about that. I'm going to talk about the officer side first. What we do as an officer is we pull over a car. Then I'm going to talk about what some things to do that may help you if you ever get pulled over. So we have several things in policy. Before the things on the screen even come into play, the first thing we expect and require of our officers is to turn on their body worn camera. So before the blue lights even come on, before they even put the stop out on the radio, we expect our officers to turn on their body worn camera and start recording. That way, whatever happens in that next stop is recorded. We would prefer they give a quick narrative about what's going on, but sometimes there's not time for all that. But they turn on their body worn camera, and the next thing they do is they call in to stop the dispatch. So they call in the stop, they give the location, they give all that information dispatch so that everybody knows that officer is now on a stop. Then as they approach the car, they should identify themselves. We don't ask questions. We don't ask you like, do you know why we were stopping you or anything like that? We identify ourselves and we tell you why we're stopping you. That's our policy. That's what we expect of our officers. We don't want to get into a game with people going, oh, do you know why I stopped you? And then you playing a guessing game as to, oh, well, was I speeding or did I run the red light? Or maybe you just did all those things. But we want them to know, we want the people to know why we're stopping them. We're going to be upfront with that, and that's expected. From there, you usually get asked for license and registration and that type of thing, and proof of ownership or registration, insurance, all that kind of stuff. And we'll go back to our cars and make sure that's all good. And then usually when we come back, we have to do things in I won't say expeditious manner, but we need to be efficient with our time, both for the officer and for you all. So if there's reasons to extend the stop, we'll explain those to you and go from there. But usually it's a pretty quick stop and we go from there. It'll usually end with a ticket or a warning, just depending on what happened. And at that time, the officer is going to give you an explanation. It should include whether or not it's a ticket or a warning. If it is a ticket, the court date, where the court is, answer those types of questions for you and get to that. State law in South Carolina does require that if you're not arrested, that you receive a ticket or a warning from a stop. So that's why you may wonder why is he, if he's going to warn me, why can't he just give me a verbal warning and let me go? Well, that's why the state law requires us to capture that and give you some type of either warning or citation. So you have the information of the officer that stopped you. On both of those, we're providing you with usually our name and badge number. That's on both of those different documents in most agencies across the state. So in that exchange, we'll explain everything to the driver, and usually we'll try to be as helpful as we can. A lot of times people want to argue that they didn't run the red light or they weren't speeding or anything like that. We tell our officers not to engage in a back and forth discussion. Just because we've written somebody a ticket doesn't mean they've been found guilty. That's what court's for. That's what the judge can decide. Everybody has the right to take their case to a court and discuss that. And we encourage our officers not to get into a back and forth. If that's the way that the discussion is going, just ask them to drive safely and disengage from the contact there. But all those things on the screen, every officer should walk up They should immediately identify themselves. I'm Captain Bruder with the Charleston Police Department. I stopped you today for running the red light right back there. And do you have your license, registration, and insurance? And then I'm likely going to go back, make sure everything's valid, everything's good to go. I'll write the ticket or the warning depending on how the stop went. And I'll come back and explain it to you and then walk back to my car and turn my body camera off at that point. So again, those are things you can expect from an officer and what we see from our side. And every one of our traffic stops, caught myself, motor vehicle stops. This is new for me as well. Every one of our motor vehicle stops is recorded on body worn camera by policy. So if we do have one that wasn't, we address that and follow up with that. So now, if you're the driver, what happens? Well, the first thing, if the blue lights come on, everybody gets nervous. What you're supposed to do is pull to the right and slow down. And I should preface this. I'm going to give you what I recommend you to do. There's some legal parameters about what's required. And a lot of those things are so situational dependent that it would just bog down the conversation here, quite frankly. There's what's legally required, but the situation largely isn't known by the driver at that time. So I'm going to give you some best tips that help the officer feel like it's a safe situation and allow you to feel safe as well. So like I said, pulling to the right, a lot of people like to pull in the middle of the road over to the median or pull to the left where there's cars still flying around you and all kinds of stuff. Generally, even if you're not being pulled over, you're supposed to pull to the right and slow down. So if you pull to the right and slow down and the car keeps going, then they weren't pulling you over. They were trying to go to a call or pull somebody else over, but pull to the right and slow down. And that is going to allows the officer to see that you've acknowledged being pulled over. You've acknowledged the blue lights. You've seen that it's there. And then start looking for a place to pull over. Look for a safe place. The officer wants you to stop in a safe place just as much as you want to stop in a safe place. So if you're like, this is a crazy 4-lane highway, and there's no shoulder, just acknowledge you pull down, you slow down to the right. If it looks like it's going to be a minute, call 911 and say, hey, it looks like I'm being pulled over. I'm trying to stop. There's just nowhere to stop. That dispatcher is going to relay back to the officer. They're not going to think you're trying to flee or anything like that. You'll find a safe space, whether that's in the parking lot or the shoulder of the road, and pull over. And then once you're on the side of the road, make sure you're safely off the road so that you don't have to worry about getting hit by another car as cars are driving by. At that point, I really don't recommend reaching all over the vehicle. Officers don't know what you're reaching for. You might be going to get your insurance. You might be going to get your registration, but all officers see are people's hands flying all over the place. You could be reaching for a gun. You could be reaching for other things. It might be perfectly innocent that you dropped your phone and you're trying to pick it up because it has your insurance card. Once the officer's behind you, once you've pulled over, I would make sure you just kind of stop the movement until they walk up to your car. That'll just ease our concerns a little bit, and it won't have you panicking trying to figure out where we are and we catch you by surprise or something like that. If you can, if the weather's not too bad and raining and all that kind of stuff, roll down the windows. It just tells us that you're acknowledging that we're there and that you're trying to consider our safety. There's no requirement to roll windows down, but again, that's something that's going to help us feel safer in the stop. If it's dark outside, people will turn on their dome lights. Again, you're just acknowledging that you are aware of the situation and you want it safe for you so we can see in the car, and you want it safe for us so you can see in the car. Let's see. Again, if you place your hands on the steering wheel, that shows us that you are concerned for our safety as much as theirs. You're following our directions at that point. And then as the officer gets up there, they see all these things. If you've rolled down your windows, you turned on your interior light, they're likely going to know and understand that this is going to be a safer than normal motor vehicle stop. The officer will go through asking you for your license and registration. Some officers that are really good, like, hey, is it in your pocket? Okay, well then go ahead and reach for it. Is it in your glove box? They'll ask you these questions so that you don't just start jumping all over the car and you may say, well, it is in my glove box and I have a firearm in there. Tell the officer that they would prefer for you to tell them that than you to pull it out when you get your insurance and there's a gun sitting there. It's legal to have guns in your center console and in your glove box. Again, just tell the officer that my registration is in the glove box. I'll be glad to get it for you, but my firearm is in there. Officers have that all the time. It's not an issue. We may say, okay, we'll just leave it there. I can run your registration through DMV and we'll go from there. But the officer is going to provide the direction at that point. Again, what you should expect from a CPD officer when we walk up to the car is that we're going to explain to you who we are, what jurisdiction we're with the Charleston Police Department, and why we stopped you. A question I always get a lot is if you feel like you weren't stopped for the right reasons, or you feel like, you know, what the officer alleged didn't happen. Well, the allegation needs to be taken up in court. But if you feel like there was some rudeness or a complaint issue, I always recommend following up with internal affairs. We always want to know, we want to know when we're doing well, and we want to know when we're doing bad. But the important stuff is that if somebody has an issue, we can set up and have a discussion with that. It may be just a discussion with the officer down the road. But those internal affairs is really the place to go and address those, not on the side of the road, not getting in an argument with the officer there. You could ask for a supervisor to come over, and that may be possible, but there may be some delay there. So again, we're trying to be expeditious with the stop and get you back underway after we address the issue that's been going on there. So those are some of the tips there for if you're pulled over. Again, my biggest thing is making sure you pull over to the right, slow down, and in some way acknowledge that the officer's behind you and that you're going to stop, and then finding a safe space for you and the officer. And then, you know, acknowledging to some degree that you want to be safe during the stop, as well as you want the officer to be safe. So we've gotten through, I guess, the how or what, the why, the how we go about it, and where it really ties into the audit is the documentation side. What we saw in our audit is that there's so many different systems that we work with in the police department that none of them connect, that we didn't really have a way to look at our motor vehicle stop data with any kind of reliability. We could pull from different systems. We could look at CAD, which is our dispatch system. We could look at our tickets. We could look at our warnings. We could look at all those things, but none of them integrated together to allow us to have a good picture of what was actually happening. So in the report came out, we spent 2019 looking at different ways to how can we make this data that we have work. We looked at 2020 to build some new systems that would work. And we finally realized that it wasn't going to be perfect. And in 2021, we started using field contact cards. Now that's a module in our record management system. I'll call them FCCs for the rest of this presentation, but we implemented in 2021 that all motor vehicle stops and all other self-initiated stops by the officer, officer-initiated stops, would be captured by the field by an FCC. We didn't really want to do this, which is why we tried to find some other options, because it duplicated all the work for the officers for every stop. Officers still have to write a ticket. They still have to write a warning. They still have to do the dispatch notes. Now they were going to also have to do an FCC. We were trying to find alternatives for this because I really didn't want to duplicate work for the officers. But in 2021, we realized we had to do something. So we launched this as a pilot. We got there. And in 2022, we saw that this is working. We worked through in 2021 some of the different data collection sides of it, some of the reporting, some of the compliance. We were at like a 70% compliance. And by 2022, when we started that year, we were closer to like an 85 to 90%, which was our goal. We knew we weren't going to be 100% doing it this way. So we started looking at and realizing that the FCCs were going to give us a reliable picture of what's going on out there. During that time, we had over 2,300 or 23,000 motor vehicle stops over the 2 years. And now we've been in a position to start looking at this data and analyzing it to see what is actually happening. So this is some of just the overall data on those 23,000 stops. And the slides I'm going to show, there's citywide, and that's every officer that works for the Charleston Police Department. And then there's the traffic unit. The traffic unit is included in the citywide number, but we're going to talk about the traffic unit a little bit more in just a few minutes. And that's going to be important to have them separated out, which is why it's done in the presentation in the slides here. So as you can see, the traffic unit likes to write tickets and very little warnings. That's the green in the bottom. And the citywide is more on the warning side. So again, we talked about different objectives, different expectations, different goals by different units in the department. So this is where it kind of becomes tricky. We were able to start collecting and looking at racial data and demographic data. This slide here shows that roughly 48 to 50% of citywide is Black drivers, where for the traffic unit is closer to 30%. Age This slide shows age. You can see that it's consistent throughout the department. It was consistent over both years of who we're stopping. I think generally we know who we expect our drivers to be in the age group. And this is really, this is an instance of where it is very similar to the correlation in the population. So flipping back to the race slide again, the third graph over here is by gender, and it's roughly 60% on the male side. And there was nothing really outstanding or back and forth with that. But as we talk through this and we pull the race slide back up again, I'm going to dig down a bit on the traffic unit. The traffic unit in 2021 realized they had a pretty big problem, and that was alcohol related fatalities. We've been working on that as a department with some training, and we really wanted to pivot towards something in a new way. And the traffic unit with and these are this graph shows all of the collisions at 100%, and the total number of collisions is the number that's in the red bar at the bottom. The red bar shows the percentage of alcohol related collisions causing fatal accident or causing death. So as you can see, we had a pretty extensive, it was our driving factor in most years of fatal collisions. And in 2021, the traffic Lieutenant Krasowski came to me and said, I think we got to do something here. We got to do something different because we're not having an impact on reducing these alcohol related collisions. They did that. They put in a plan. It involved moving more officers to when the collisions were happening, which was between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. They directed them to where collisions were happening and these alcohol fatals were happening. He was giving weekly direction to officers about where things were happening and what was needing to be addressed. And he was following it up. Now that we have the data, we can follow up on it more. This was an example of his weekly report where he would show all the mapped FCCs, where they were, where they directed them to. And usually when you see these one-offs, it was neighborhood complaints, and that was day shift officers. So he was using this. We were being very data driven, but we were doing this with about 10 officers in just the traffic unit with a very clear purpose of reducing alcohol related fatalities. And they were very successful. There is still a little bit of red down here. That was 2 alcohol related collisions last year. But those were actually around 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. So they were well outside of when he was intended and outside of his objective. So in effect, he reduced this 16 right here in 2021 to 0 in 2022. So very effective and very manageable. Trying to stay on time, Paul. I'm with you. This was just another graph showing some of the impairment and how that focused effort, not only did it produce more DUI arrests, but it also created this kind of sense of you're accomplishing something. So other officers in the department started contributing as well. So it had a bleed over effect of having more DUI arrests. And then we saw our total fatalities went down slightly, but the number that were related to impairment went down significantly, especially from the previous year. So again, I circle back to this, the traffic unit. You look at just their section is 30%. So a lot of times we talk about disparities and disproportionalities, and the proper benchmark for the traffic unit focused on collisions would be people that are driving in the city of Charleston. So if we compared it to the population of the city of Charleston, that wouldn't be exactly accurate because we have several million visitors to the city every year. We have people that commute to the city. A couple 100,000 people every day are driving into and out of the city. So how do we capture who is driving on our roads? And there's some studies that support this, and we use, we call it not at fault collision data. So that if in a 2-car collision, the not at fault person is arguably randomly in a collision. So that person provides us a very clear snapshot at random of who's driving on our roads. In the city of Charleston, for the last several years, we've been watching this. It ranges between 28 and 30%. So if that is our benchmark as to who the traffic unit should be stopping, it should be 28 to 30% Black males or Black drivers. And that is very much in line with the traffic unit. That's what they've been doing. That's what they did for both years. It was roughly 30%. So they are having a successful outcome. Their outputs are not creating what I call side effects of having disproportionate stops to who we would expect them to be stopping. And the biggest thing is it's working. It worked. It worked for the traffic unit, and we're going to continue it in this year. They may have to tweak a little bit of the data. I mean, tweak a little bit of their response to make sure they stay on track with what the data is showing. But for that unit, they were able to hone in and focus and accomplish an outcome in a positive way with having very little harm on the community. But that was 10 officers focused on a very unique problem and finding a solution. Now, the tricky part for me, now that I'm in patrol, is taking this for all the different problems in all the different communities across the city and figure out how do we use motor vehicle stops as a tool to address those. We first want to make sure that it works, and then we want to make sure that we're monitoring for anything that we may be doing that's creating harm in the community. And I feel like we have a lot of questions pending, so I'm going to stop there and see where we got to go. And I'll be glad to circle back around if we need to.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go through some of these questions that we've had submitted. A couple of the first ones, and this may goes, does the CPD have an elite force like the Scorpion unit in Memphis? And under what circumstances do they interact with citizens or motor vehicles?
So we don't have, I would hate, I'm hesitant to even say that it's called an elite unit like the Scorpion unit. We have units that are specifically dedicated to intelligence-based policing. We have officers that are out doing specific objectives. We don't have anything that we call a Scorpion unit or anything similar to that. Again, we do have a unit that's focused specifically on intelligence driven. So they work very closely with our detectives unit and our special investigations unit and the warrants unit to follow up with people that we already know are committing crime, and they're very strategic and very exact with what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I would just add emphatically no with what Jason just said with a little bit of narrative. With the little bit we know about the Scorpion unit, we don't have anything even remotely that resembles that.
I'm going to go, another question we had is, how is the decision made by officers on if it's a warning or a citation?
Yeah, great question. A lot of times this just depends on what the purpose of the stop is. Why were they doing the stop in the first place? A lot of times officers are stopping people for headlights being out. Obviously, they just want to make sure people know. And does it really help to write a ticket to somebody for that? Or they may just decide on warning. So a lot of it's situational. There's no clear line that says always a ticket, never a ticket. DUI is the one thing that we don't allow by policy for the officer to have discretion. If somebody's DUI, they're driving under the influence, that they're likely going to get a ticket and go to jail. But the ticket or warning thing, ultimately, we want to do what works. That's going to be kind of the challenge for the traffic unit. You saw that they write a bunch of tickets. Could they have the same outcome and write warnings? Could they write 50-50 and still have an effect? Those are questions that we don't know, but now that we're collecting the data, we'll be able to look at that further and see what's going to have the best effect for the objective we're trying to accomplish.
Why do you think there's a higher percentage of Black drivers cited versus white drivers?
I'm not sure. Again, we've been collecting this data. The data is reliable now, and that's what we're starting to dig into. Those are the discussions we're having. Those are the policy. Again, I mentioned General Order 29 that's in the final review that's going to be pushed out. And being more objective driven should allow us to see where the disproportionalities may lie or what's happening. It all goes back to what was the purpose of officers conducting the stops. And again, the traffic unit had a very specific example. If I were to say, why does all of West Ashley, what was the problem for all of West Ashley? Every community, every neighborhood, maybe even every block may have a different issue that the officers are trying to address. So we're trying to capture that. We've got kind of the outputs that are going along the way. We're trying to capture that. What are the officers doing? What are the expectations? What are the objectives that their lieutenants and their sergeants have for them? And then are we being effective in that?
Kind of piggybacking on that, were you saying that the impaired drivers were also a higher percentage of Black males?
No.
Okay. And then why are traffic citations, do you think, increasing again after years of decrease?
So again, we had a pretty intentional focus to reduce alcohol-related fatalities. I think that had something to do with it. And comparing things to 2020 and 2021 is always going to have an asterisk next to it. In 2021, a lot of people still weren't traveling. A lot of things weren't opening or weren't open. And so there's a little bit of effect there. This is the first time we've actually been able to look at it this way. We are looking at just our FCC data. So a lot of the questions that are being asked by the community are the same questions we're asking of our department. We haven't had but 2 years to look at this. That seems like a long time, but we haven't had these systems in place to look at, and now we do. And these are all great questions and things that we're going to continue to look at and continue to figure out the answers to.
And one more is, how are you using this new data to enhance the CPD operations?
That's like a softball for me. I'm a data guy. Y'all can tell I love this stuff. I want to first ensure that we are being as effective as possible. I want to make sure that if we're asking officers to go out there and stop people, that it's having the effect that we need it to. I don't want to do any harm in the community. I don't want to stop 1,000 people to not solve a problem. If we have to stop 4 people and it solves the problem, then we stop 4 people and it solves the problem. I want to make sure that we're using this data in a way that's going to make sure we're effective first, that we're contributing to our communities and solving their problems. And then we'll start to focus on how do we mitigate any negative outcomes that may happen? What are the side effects, like I call them?
What have been the most significant changes that have been made for motor vehicle stops, and as far as like policies and directives?
The biggest thing, and I kind of breezed through it, but the multiple systems that we have to collect this data was our biggest hurdle. And making the decision to make officers duplicate their work so that we can answer these questions is the most significant piece so far. That's going to allow all of the change that we need to happen down the road, because we can actually look at data and measure this as we're moving forward. So asking our officers to do that, putting that into policy that they're going to have to duplicate their work was a significant discussion that we needed to make sure we get it right. If we're going to ask officers to do twice as much work, we need to make sure that it's going to have it's going to be worth their time. We believe it is, we believe it has been, and we believe it will continue to be very effective. So adding that piece that we're going to require officers to, in a separate system, keep up with all of our stops where we can look at everything at one time and not have to hope that things line up and do some assumption analysis and all kinds of other stuff. What really gets blurry. That's what happened in our audit, because we had to start making assumptions as to what the data was showing us. Having that piece put in is going to allow all the future change and all the future data collection and all the future objective driven approaches to happen. Without that piece, we wouldn't be able to answer the questions.
Okay, we have one more. What are the protocols for checkpoints, and what is the expectation of drivers under the assumption no crime has been committed?
Okay, so I'll take protocols for checkpoints. We've pretty much gone to a policy that unless it's for public safety, for checkpoint, like if we need to have a murder suspect and we believe they went down 3 different roads, then we would set up a checkpoint. We've kind of gone away from doing DUI checkpoints and those kind of things. I'm not saying that we wouldn't go back to those in a while, but generally they're not very effective. The second part of that was expectation of drivers under the assumption no crime has been committed. I would say the officer's presence or the officer's preference would be, and again, this is going to be my preference, not the legal answer, is if a driver may not know that the same vehicle or very similar vehicle that you're driving was just used in a robbery down the road, and you're pulled over and the officer thinks you might be involved with that robbery, it may take them only a minute or a few seconds to figure out you're not that person. So the driver knows they haven't done anything wrong, but the officer doesn't know that. So it may take a few minutes to do that. And hopefully the officer, that's where the explaining why you were stopped, the officer is going to come back and explain all that to you. But the driver likely doesn't have all of the information, just like the exact opposite could be, the reverse could be true for the officer. The officer could pull you over for something very minor that they didn't even realize that you just rolled through a stop sign or something like that. But the driver knows that they just committed murder and the officer doesn't know that. So they walk up not knowing things. So there's a bit of unknown on both sides. So just a little bit of patience to see what's going to happen, what's going to go on. And that's where if you feel like you were treated unjustly or unfairly or rudely, that's where internal affairs would come into play, and filing that complaint, letting it be known, talking to a supervisor, those types of things.
Okay, what has the CPD uses indicators of success in the area of motor vehicle stops?
Well, there's a bunch of them. And that's what we're going to start. We're working through that to see what the officers have been doing, what we've been doing, and how we can tailor that to make sure they're effective. Some of the things are going to be very complaint driven. There's people speeding down my road. Well, then we're going to go over there and write speeding tickets. That's some of the objectives that are going to vary. I think the traffic unit itself is going to continue to focus on alcohol related fatalities, because that we saw that work. And if we can continue to allow that to happen and add in more education and engineering, we could have a significant impact on saving lives in that manner. As for the other things, it's really going to be driven by what problems are occurring in communities and what they're the best solution for that. Motor vehicle stops may not be the solution for the problems that are going on, and we would use a different tool. Sometimes it's just getting out and knowing somebody, but so there's nothing set, but we are moving toward being more objective driven so we can evaluate that and see our successes.
I had one are y'all looking, this is for me, my question, as far as like pedestrian fatalities go for motor vehicles? I know that recently happened downtown.
Yeah, we recently had one of those. Those are a little difficult. I don't have the stats right offhand, but pedestrian fatalities and pedestrian injuries typically aren't the driver being at fault. There's a different type of enforcement. There's a different type of education and engineering. We're no longer focused on drivers. We're now have to focus on people that are walking into the roads or may not know the appropriate place to cross. So it's a much different factor than looking at that. But if the traffic unit monitors that, we all monitor that. We want pedestrians to feel safe on the walking on the roads as well, and traveling, especially in our downtown, which is much more urban and on top of each other. So we do monitor that, but it's not going to have the same objectives and outcomes as something like alcohol related fatalities, which are largely with vehicles involved.
But that's a great question. We could talk probably for an hour, even just on that one topic. Lighting. Some areas are really dark. The narrowness of sidewalks, the lack of signage, and alcohol is involved in some of those. Some of it's involving the pedestrian or the bicyclist. The lack of good areas for bikes to commute in different segments of the city. So there's a lot that we can and are looking at. We kind of have a traffic committee, and we have different partners throughout the city and throughout the region. Frankly, the CARTA and COG and a lot of other groups are really focused on that as an issue. It's a substantial issue for us.
Thanks, guys. Well, I know we've run a little bit over our time. I think this is a great topic. I think it's also led us to have probably 5 more topics for these sessions. It's just incredible. I want to thank all my fellow CPAC council members for your time in helping put this together. I especially want to thank the Charleston Police Department. I think it really speaks a lot of their willingness and their transparency to come on a session like this and not only give us some insight into what they do, but to be open to the questions. One of the comments I hear all the time directed at me from Deputy Chief Walker is, we're the Charleston Police Department. We're not concerned with what other departments do. We care about what we do. And so, I've seen other departments, they're not as open as this and willing to work with us. And, as the CPAC being tasked with helping bridge the communication gaps, whether real or perceived, between the public and the Charleston Police Department, sessions like these are really beneficial to all of us. Chief, I want to thank you and your leadership team. It starts from the top, and you all setting the example lets your patrol officers know what's expected from them. If you're open and transparent with us, they're doing the same. They realize the expectation is the same. I know that data collection is a work in progress. As we pointed out at the beginning, there are several dashboards. We had a session not too long ago on a dashboard where the public can go and look to see where were contact cards taken, where were arrests made, all the different things. We're starting to really have robust data that's public for all of us to see, as well as there's a public complaint line. If you've been pulled over on a motor vehicle stop and you're unhappy with what happened, there's a time and a place, and you can certainly register with internal affairs. You can go online, you can call in to a complaint line and make a complaint. So, those statistics are, we haven't shown those, but those are statistics we track as well. If no complaints are coming in, are we communicating it properly? We also want to know if there's too many. So that kind of feedback from the public is really important for all of us to do our jobs and be efficient. But again, thank you, Chief Reynolds. Especially thank you, Captain Bruder. It was a long discussion for you, and I know you're passionate about it and you love the topic, but we really appreciate you putting this together.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Thanks, everyone. And this will be available for
Thank you.
viewing. I think it'll be published soon. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next public session. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks.